Hello everybody, and welcome to this very special series where we're looking at Pluto and his transit through each of the whole sign houses. I'm so excited to be sharing this series with you. If you like this video, then please like, share and subscribe to my channel. And if you would like to study astrology further and in depth with me and even gain a certification if you desire, then please consider joining my classes at the Royal Stars Academy. The link is in the description below. Now, on the 23rd of March 2023, which is ahead in time at the moment that I am recording this, but maybe you're watching this after that has occurred, Pluto will make his first foray into the sign of Aquarius since he was last there in 1781. Now, it's been a long time between Aquarian transits for the little planet Pluto. As such, I thought it would be a good time to talk about Pluto changing signs and what it will mean for everyone depending on your rising sign in whole sign astrology. So this video series will be applicable whenever Pluto changes signs in the future. But as I'm recording this in the run-up to Pluto in Aquarius in 2023, it's very pertinent to us now and will be pertinent to us for almost 20 years as Pluto moves through this sign, the sign of Aquarius. Now, Pluto is an unusual planet in astrology and also in astronomy. So for a start, he has an elliptical orbit, which means that he spends different lengths of time in each zodiac sign. I'm going to talk about the lengths of time a little later in this introduction. But check out this diagram of Pluto's orbit and you'll see how different it is to all the other planets in the solar system. So let's look a little more now at the astronomy of Pluto. So although astronomically it's classified as a dwarf planet, in astrology we all know that Pluto packs a massive punch, but more on the astrology of Pluto a little bit later. However, just because an object is small and because an object is far away doesn't mean that it's not powerful. Pluto is atomically powerful, and anyone who's familiar with astrology will know that he is really punchy. So our moon, Luna, it weighs 6 times as much as Pluto does. It's more hefty in that sense. First little tidbit of information astronomically about Pluto. We realize that he is a small object at the far reaches of the solar system. It's quite amazing that we know of his existence, actually, especially as our moon is more weighty than he is. It takes 248 years for Pluto to do a complete cycle around the sun. And Pluto's average surface temperature is a very chilly minus 230 degrees Celsius. It actually feels like that today where I am as I'm recording this in the middle of winter. Minus 280 degrees Celsius is actually minus 382 degrees Fahrenheit. So you can imagine, wherever you are in the world, how cold that actually is. Not surprising considering Pluto is at the far reaches of the solar system, a long way from the sun. Now, Pluto has 5 known moons and is classified, as I said, as one of the dwarf planets, along with Eris, who is the largest of the dwarf planets, but also Haumea, Makemake, and Ceres. They're the other dwarf planets that we know of. Now, Pluto was discovered in 1930 by the American astronomer Clyde Tombaugh, and in fact, there's we'll talk about this in a minute, but there is a glacier on Pluto that they've named after the man who discovered Pluto. And Pluto resides in the Kuiper belt at the very edge of the solar system beyond Neptune. And the name Pluto was actually suggested by a young 11-year-old child named Venetia Burney, and she was a mythology lover. So contrary to popular opinion, she didn't name Pluto after the Disney dog. In fact, the naming of the Disney dog came not long after the naming of the tiny planet, who was named after Pluto in ancient mythology. And we're going to talk about that very soon. One thing that fascinates me about Pluto is that when the shuttle, the New Horizons shuttle, went past Pluto in 2015, it took some photos as it passed by this tiny planet. Once again, check out these photos. Now you'll notice this heart-shaped colouring on the side of Pluto. I find this fascinating. Well, this is a glacier named after the discoverer of Pluto, and it's a glacier of frozen nitrogen. Now, due to the heat or the temperature below the surface of this glacier, this heart shape slowly churns over the course of millennia. So it changes over the course of millennia. And scientists believe that the glacial churning is ice continually refreshing itself, which is why the glacier actually shows no signs of craterial impact. You know, like there's moons, Pluto has 5 moons, and they all show evidence of having been hit by, having craters because they've been hit by asteroids and things like that. This glacier has no evidence of that because of this churning that refreshes it. Keep that in mind. Keep the word refreshing in mind because it correlates as above, so below to how we understand Pluto in astrology. And keep in mind the significance of our first human beholding of Pluto, which revealed this beating heart. It refreshes, and you know, it expands and contracts and expands and contracts as part of its refreshing process. It ebbs and flows with the cycles of the warming and cooling that Pluto experiences as it travels around the sun. Because sometimes Pluto is closer to the sun than at other times, and that affects its speed as it travels through the zodiac signs. So, in essence, Pluto's temperature ebbs and flows, which causes this heart to ebb and flow as it refreshes its cycle. It's the beating heart of Pluto. This is very important to remember when we come to talk about the astrology shortly. Now, scientists also believe that when Pluto was a very young planet, it probably contained a H2O ocean, a water ocean. In fact, it's also likely to have some sort of water in an oceanic form still in existence underneath its icy crust. But of course, we haven't landed on Pluto to determine that. We're only surmising. So it's a planet of mysteries astronomically that are slowly but surely being revealed to all of humanity. And I find all these discoveries to be very exciting, especially when we see the world through the lens of the as above, so below Hermetic principle. What about the mythology of Pluto? Well, Pluto was in mythology the son of the Titan god Saturn, and he was one of 3 brothers and 3 sisters, and 2 of the brothers and the 3 sisters were eaten by Saturn or Kronos, and these gods that were eaten, these brothers and sisters that were eaten, were known collectively as the Olympians, and they were vomited up when they were rescued by their heroic brother and king of the gods, Jupiter. And I talked about the mythology of Jupiter in my series on Jupiter transiting through all the houses, if you want to check that out. But Pluto is one of these 3 supreme male deities of the ancient Olympian Parthenon, along with his siblings, Jupiter, Neptune, Pluto, they were the masculine ones, and his sisters, Juno, Vesta, and Ceres, the 6 of them. So Pluto was the mysterious Roman god of the dead and the lord of the underworld. And this is why I've got this little display happening here. We've got a face mask from the Day of the Dead here, some dead dried flowers. These are things that Pluto correlates to. We also have a succulent. Pluto rules succulents and cactuses. We're going to talk more about what Pluto rules shortly, but I just thought I'd explain why I've got that little display beside me to symbolize Pluto. He was the lord of the dead, the lord of the underworld. He was also known as the bringer of wealth, or the god of great wealth. So the name Pluto means the unseen one, and this is why Pluto was given this name, because he had been unseen and now was seen. So very pertinent to the astronomical naming of Pluto, which I've just described. Pluto lived in underground, gloomy places, and he seemed to, as a god, have very little interest in the world of men. But similarly, he also had very little interest in the affairs of the gods as well, and he tended to avoid associating with men and gods. He was very much the loner god. He was a figure in ancient mythology of enormous dread, terrible might, like very powerful god. And he was a god who dispensed luck and controlled the fates of mortals. Pretty full on, hey? He ruled the regions within the earth and everything that came out of inner earth, so to speak, the minerals, the precious stones. And this is part of the reason he was known as the god of great wealth. Pluto was the Roman counterpart to the Greek god Hades. And Hades was the Greek god who ruled the underworld in Greek mythology. Pluto rode a chariot and he carried a staff in his hand, and he was often accompanied by Cerberus, a three-headed dog that served as both his pet and a guardian of the underworld. And if you've watched movies and so forth about mythology, you probably will have seen that three-headed dog represented. I think it's in the film Clash of the Titans, if I'm not mistaken, old film from the 60s or 70s. But one of Pluto's most famous myths centered around his abduction of the young woman Persephone and the grief of her mother, the goddess Ceres. So Pluto, this loner god living in the gloomy underworld, rarely interacting with gods or mankind, was pitied by the goddess Venus. So she told her son Cupid to fire one of his love arrows at Pluto so that he would fall in love with the next woman that he saw. And that woman was Persephone. She was playing in the fields at Nysa. So his passion and his desire was uncontrollable because of this arrow that had been fired at him by Cupid. Keep that passion and desire element in mind. It's very pertinent to the astrology of Pluto, actually. So in his passion, in his desire, he abducted Persephone in his chariot. And following her abduction, her mother, Ceres, searched high and low for her missing daughter in a panic and grief. And her search was fruitless because nobody knew where she'd gone. Persephone was in the underworld, and she became there the unwilling bride of Pluto. People in some mythologies refer to it as the rape of Persephone. But in essence, she became the queen of the underworld. Pluto, on the other hand, he refused to acknowledge that he had kidnapped her. He refused to even let it be known where she was, so she was being held in secret. I mean, one of these horrible experiences, and it brings to mind all these dreadful experiences that we sometimes hear in the news about abductions and kidnapping, and people have been held prisoner for years and so on, and what grief that must cause the parents and family involved. Ceres, similarly, grew very thin. She grew pale and emaciated due to her great grief, her sorrow, and her constant searching for her daughter. Now, Ceres was the goddess of agriculture and fertility. And because of her sorrow and her emaciated appearance, it correlated to what was happening on the earth, and the earth suffered. The land and the animals became barren and infertile. Agriculture suffered because the goddess governing those things was not in her power. She was grieving. Now, Mercury, the messenger god, informed Jupiter of Persephone's whereabouts. He happened to have heard on the grapevine where she was, and he let Jupiter know where she was. And Jupiter ordered his brother Pluto, because Jupiter was the king of the gods and everybody sort of bowed down to Jupiter. He was the rescuer, the hero who saved them from their father. So Jupiter ordered that Pluto release Persephone at once, and he did that because he wanted to restore the fertility to the earth. And of course, Pluto had to comply to avoid the wrath of his brother, the king of the gods, Jupiter. So having no choice, Pluto returned Persephone, but on the proviso that she had not eaten anything while she was in the underworld, because if she had, she would therefore belong to the underworld if she'd ingested anything that came from the underworld. And it was discovered that Persephone had consumed a few pomegranate seeds while she was in the underworld. And so Pluto demanded that Persephone should remain with him for a portion of each year. Jupiter agreed to this demand because she had consumed fruit from the underworld, pomegranate seeds. And so he ordered that Persephone would spend half her time with Ceres on the earth and half her time with Pluto in the underworld. And now we see this represented in the seasons. You know, Persephone leaves the earth in early autumn, and we start to, things die down, things get cold and wintry, the earth is infertile and frozen and barren, and she returns back to Ceres. Persephone comes back to her mother in early spring. And this is obviously when things begin to bloom, the days get warmer, and we find that things start to fruit and flourish again. So during her absence, Ceres is grieving and the world grows barren. And when she returns, the world flourishes back to life. And you notice the symbology here? Death and rebirth, very much associated with the essence of Pluto. That he rules death, but he is also associated with the rebirthing phase due to this mythology. So due to Pluto's mysterious nature and his association with death, he was not a central figure in the worship of Roman state religion. So there were no state festivals, no temples, no dedications in his honor. He had little to do with the world of men, and men tended, the world of mankind tended to avoid him as well. So let's talk about Pluto in astrology. This gets really interesting and exciting. Pluto is the modern ruler of the sign of Scorpio, and like the mysterious water sign, they do share many similarities in the things that they govern. Now, Pluto is really the planet that defines the 20th century, the century that's just been, because he entered our collective consciousness. In other words, he was discovered and we became aware of him in 1930. Now, obviously, he had existed for millennia before that, but we only found out about Pluto as human beings on the Earth in 1930. And so Pluto has connections to everything that manifested around that time, sort of within 20 years either side of 1930. Now, this includes atomic energy, nuclear power, plutonium, weapons of mass destruction. Those heavy-duty things that I've just mentioned, I mean, imagine the permanent winter that would be visited upon the Earth in the event of a nuclear holocaust. Persephone might never return if those things were unleashed on the Earth. Pluto has governance of those things. Let's hope they're never unleashed, because we rather enjoy having Persephone return in the springtime. So the Pluto in Leo generation, I'll talk about the generations of Pluto in just a second. The Pluto in Leo generation were the first full generation born into the conscious awareness of Pluto. So Pluto was halfway through the sign of Cancer when he was discovered. And so by the time the Pluto and Leo generation, the baby boomers, were being born, everybody knew about Pluto. He was in full conscious awareness. So the Pluto and Leo generation, all of them, everyone born with Pluto and Leo, hold this awareness and their consciousness and their human state of Pluto and his amazing power, amazing and terrifying power. And it's really interesting to me to observe what's going on in the world now in 2022 as I'm recording this, that it's the Pluto and Leo generation that are holding the power of Pluto in their hands. And the eventuality of whether we go into a nuclear winter or not is in the hands of the leaders of our day and age, which, for better or worse, are the Pluto in Leo generation. So Pluto is the planet that defines the generations. Let me go through the examples. And as I do this, you'll see how Pluto spends different lengths of time in different signs because he has this very strange orbit. So Pluto was in Leo from 1937 to 1956. He was 19 years in the sign of Leo. This is the baby boomer generation. Pluto was in Virgo from 1956 to 1971. 15 years. You can see it's getting less. 15 years in the sign of Virgo. This is the Generation X or the group 1, if you like, of Generation X. And then Pluto was in Libra from 1971 to 1983, 13 years in this sign. It's getting less again. This was group 2 of Generation X, because some people in this generation classify themselves as Generation X. But I have read that this generation is also known as the Xennials, Xennials, the Xennials. Then Pluto was in Scorpio from 1983 to 1985. Only 12 years in the sign of Scorpio. This is where Pluto spends his shortest length of time, in the sign of Scorpio. And this is Gen Y, the millennials, Pluto and Scorpio generation. I'm excited by this generation because it's this generation, Gen Y, the millennials, and because they are born with Pluto in Scorpio, the sign that Pluto rules, they are waking the world up to the power of astrology and the occult again. And they're very intense. They're a very intense generation. We'll find out why, because as we go along here, because Pluto is a very intense planet, powerful people, powerful generation, powerful planet in a very powerful position. So this generation are going to be the movers and shakers. They're going to be the ones who change the world and hopefully regenerate the world and bring the springtime back to the world from what has been stolen, which I believe has been stolen over the last 80 years or so. And we're getting up to sort of 90 to 100 years since Pluto has been discovered. So very interesting generation to keep an eye on. The Pluto in Sagittarius generation goes from 1995 to 2008. Pluto was 13 years in this sign. This is Generation Z. Pluto in Capricorn. Pluto spent 15 years in the sign of Capricorn from 2008 to 2023. Now we're coming to the conclusion of the Pluto in Capricorn years, and it has been said that this is known as Generation Alpha, this particular generation. Then from 2023 to 2043, Pluto is going to be in Aquarius. And this is going to be 20 years in this sign. A new generation will begin in 2023. Pluto will then be in Pisces from 2043 to 2068, 25 years in the sign of Pisces. He's going to be 29 years in the sign of Aries, which is going to last from 2068 to 2097. Then he's going to move into Taurus for 33 years. And you know, Taurus sits opposite Scorpio. This is where Pluto spends the longest duration, 33 years in the sign of Taurus, from 2097 to 2130. 2130 is when that period, that generation, is going to end. And then we will have Pluto in Gemini. That's going to be for 30 years. Now the length of time in a sign starts to decrease. This is going to last from 2130 to 2160, 30 years in the sign of Gemini. And then Pluto in Cancer from 2160 to 2186, 26 years in the sign of Cancer. And then we're back to Pluto in Leo all over again. So that's how Pluto governs the generations. It's a very generational planet, and we define our generational influences by the length of time Pluto spends in each sign. So in any singular lifetime, Pluto is only ever going to transit 3 to at most 6 houses, because he just takes that long to move through a sign. So therefore, the transits of Pluto that you will have in your lifetime are extremely important to your life. You incarnated to experience those particular transits for the growth of your soul, for better or worse. Now, not everyone's going to experience a transit of Pluto to the powerful first house, but those that do will experience life-changing results. Not everyone's going to experience a transit of Pluto to the 10th house, but those that do are likely to go through a powerful change in how they are perceived by the world at large. Not everyone's going to go through a Pluto transit to the 3rd house, but those that do will experience extraordinary up-leveling of intuition and communicative skills. So wherever Pluto is making his transits over the course of your lifetime, is just what your soul needs for your growth. So Pluto is the expression, this is what Pluto rules in astrology, what he's all about in astrology. He is power and powerful people, control, hidden realms, anything that's taboo, anything that brings a crisis into our life. Nuclear holocaust, big time crisis, that's Pluto. You know, any type of crisis is a Pluto event. Pluto also has to do with purging in our life, releasing, letting go of, excreting and getting rid of things. That's Pluto. Pluto also rules renewal. Hence we have that mythology of the renewal of the springtime after the winter. Death and rebirth, renewal, transformation. Big mythology of change, you know, winter to spring, that transformation from cold to warmth, from death to life. Pluto rules those things. Anything in life that brings a transformation is from Pluto, or considered a Plutonian experience. Pluto rules rebirthing, regeneration, renovation. He brings hidden things that are secret, out into the light. Remember his name and the meaning of his name, that which is hidden. And then he's been discovered in our lifetime. We have brung the hidden things into the light. Pluto rules, or has to do with having incredible ambition, second to none. People with Pluto strong in their chart on the ascendant or conjunct with the sun or the moon, maybe on the midheaven as well. People who have Pluto strong in their chart are the masters of ambition, the masters of hustle. They get things done. They make it happen, because that's what Pluto's all about. In a sense, Pluto is a bit like Jupiter. Jupiter amplifies in astrology whatever it connects with or wherever it sits in a horoscope. Jupiter makes it bigger, larger, bigger than life. However, rather than amplification, Pluto, because amplification is Jupiter, Pluto tends to give tremendous power to wherever it sits in life. For example, Pluto in a conjunction with Venus gives powerful desires and powerful passions. Just like in the mythology, when Venus told her son to fire the arrow at Pluto, what did it give to Pluto? Powerful desire, powerful passion. Same deal in astrology. When Venus and Pluto are sitting together in the chart, powerful desire, powerful passion present in your life. When Pluto sits with the sun, you get a powerful ego, a powerful sense of identity. Wherever Pluto sits, whatever planet it sits with, whatever house it's in, it's going to empower that realm of our life. So there's tremendous intensity wherever Pluto sits in a chart. Pluto strong people can actually be very intense people, because Pluto's an intense planet, and they can often be very polarizing. Why is that? Well, we are at one end of the solar system, sitting up near the sun, getting nice and warm. Where's the other end? The polaric opposite, Pluto, right out in the Kuiper Belt. Pluto can be polarizing. We either love Pluto people or they turn us right off and we want to have nothing to do with them. Madonna has Pluto in her first house, those who are familiar with the singer Madonna from the 80s and early 90s. And I always found her to be one of the most polarizing celebrities. I couldn't understand why everybody liked her so much. Okay, her music was fine and everything, but as a person, I just found her completely off-putting. And that's my opinion, which I'm entitled to. You're entitled to yours. But she has Pluto in her first house. And people either loved her to bits or they just were like, what the? No way. So Madonna is a perfect example of how polarizing, to my mind, a Plutonian type person can be. Pluto is a planet that decomposes. That's what death does. It sort of eats away at things, the maggots and the what have you, eating away at the flesh, decomposes things. Pluto also composts things. And what do we do when we compost something? We throw it on our plants, we throw it on our garden. And what happens then? The daffodils come up, the roses bloom brighter and stronger and with greater scent. Our decomposition, our composting of whatever's going on in our life gives a rebirth to fruiting and flourishing. That's Pluto energy. The phoenix bird is also associated with Pluto. What is the phoenix bird all about? The death. If you've watched Maleficent, the film Maleficent, very Plutonian character, Maleficent. What happens in the sequel to Maleficent? She, not to give the plot away, but she dies and is reborn as the phoenix bird. So very Plutonian imagery. Again, Pluto is the ancient god of great wealth, as well as the god of the underworld in mythology. So in our underworld times, when we go through the darkness, when we go through the shadow period of our life, the deep journey of the soul, then we often discover the hidden reserves of personal power in those times. We discover enlightenment in that dark night of the soul. We discover the resilience within which transforms us and enables us to emerge into our power, into our springtime, out of the darkness into the springtime. So this is what true wealth is. Yes, Pluto also has connections to physical wealth, to jewels and gold and things that come from within the earth and the wealth that it generates. Definitely has connections to that. But true wealth is found when we've gone through the dark night of the soul, our underworld experiences, our inner battle psychologically, and we've come out the other side. We've faced death, and death no longer has any fear for us because we've been into the darkness and we emerge into our power and our springtime. People with Pluto strong in their chart tend to go through times like that in life that transform them. And, they might start out in life with their power taken away from them through sickness or through abuse or difficulties or whatever. But when they go through the darkness and they emerge out the other side, they stand in their power, having overcome the sickness, the abuse, the darkness that their life has represented. Pluto strong people have a difficult course to chart in life, but a great personal power that they can generate that can serve them well once they emerge into their springtime and take their power back. Now, there is a shadow side to Pluto, if you haven't already gathered. What I've talked about is perhaps the more positive sides of Pluto that we can work with and utilize: personal power, great wealth, composting and rebirthing ourselves. These are actually positives that we can utilize in our life, transformation. But there is a very dark side to Pluto, naturally. Cruelty and abuse are associated with Pluto, and usually we find those exhibiting when we find Pluto in hard aspect with Mars, or occasionally with Saturn as well. Pluto expresses either as the giver of the abuse. So if you've got Pluto, let's say in a conjunction with Mars, for example, it's not always going to exhibit this way, but it can work out through that conjunction of Mars and Pluto, that we are the giver of abuse to others. We're abusive. But it can also work out that people with Pluto-Mars conjunction are also the recipients of the abuse in life. So if you have a Pluto-Mars conjunction, you might have experienced a lot of abuse in your life, and you need to be very consciously aware of not becoming the abuser who gives it out to others because you've suffered it. So cruelty and abuse are the shadow side that we see with Pluto energy. Pluto also is willpower. Now that can be positive if we're using our willpower to overcome our life's difficulties, but willpower that destroys things, ambition that stops at nothing, is the shadow side of Pluto energy. And many politicians and successful people have a strong Pluto in their chart because they have this ruthless ambition, this willpower that stops at nothing to dominate and control everything. That's the shadow. That's another shadow side of Pluto, and it's really heavy duty. Pluto strong people can be edge walkers. What do I mean by that? Well, think about it. Pluto resides on the edge of the solar system. Thus, he represents the edge of our conscious knowledge. risk takers in a very dark sense of the word, people who err on almost the evil side. They're willing to go to the edge and associate with nasty people and make deals with the devil and those sorts of things. Now, you can be an edge walker in positive Pluto energy as well, and this would look like somebody who enjoys extreme sports or someone who loves mystery and crime novels. My kids are actually very into this, to be honest. They love the sort of like the horror-y kind of scary films and that sort of thing. They love the sort of dark fairy tales and that kind of stuff. So that's things that get your adrenaline pumping, things that get you on the edge of your seat. That's what it means to be an edge walker, and that's the positive expression. If you've got Pluto strong in your chart and you want to counteract any sort of evil inclinations, then go and read lots of crimes and thrillers and horrors. Get into that stuff. Read up about serial killers and deep psychological understanding of the criminal mind, and research those things, because the more you get involved in the positive expression of Pluto energy, the less you're going to have a desire to go into the ruthless, evil, cruel, other shadow side that is Pluto energy. Now, I've talked a lot about the darkness of Pluto in this introduction, and I want to come back to what I talked about earlier now, which is what the New Horizons probe discovered when it flew past Pluto in 2015, and that was the heart, the beating heart on the side of Pluto. This is very much an as above, so below principle that we're seeing here. Pluto has a heart. He did have a heart in mythology. He fell passionately in love with Persephone. Okay, well, he was cruel and he, abducted her and what have you. But there is a heart there that feels things deeply. Plutonian people do feel very deeply, very intensely, very passionately. This heart on the side of Pluto should represent to us the passion that is available to us. We all have Pluto somewhere in the chart. We all have passions and desires in relation to something in our life. And it is okay to honor those things, heart-centered. And I want to just bring to light the awareness that often when we go through our shadow experiences, our darkness, our, the evil side of who we are, or we're in a state of melancholy and depression and deep struggle with life, we're in our underworld phase. Just know, if you're going through that at the moment, if you're experiencing fear or trauma of some sort, that you have the ability within you to regenerate and rebirth and come back with a strong heart that is capable of loving again, that is capable of experiencing and feeling once more good things in the sunshine and the springtime. Pluto has a heart. There is gold in the underworld experiences that you have, and there is a renewal in the underworld experiences that you go through, and we all go through them. There is also love at the core of what Pluto does in our life. Why? Because Pluto really does want to heal us, because he loves us. A couple of my girlfriends and I have had many discussions, my astrologically minded girlfriends have had many discussions about Pluto. A number of my highly intuitive girlfriends believe that Pluto is actually a feminine planet. Now, he was an ancient god of masculine quality, but there is also something deeply passionately feminine, and Pluto rules a feminine sign, Scorpio. I'm not here to get into a debate about whether or not Pluto is a masculine or feminine planet or energy. That's something that you're welcome to do in the discussion comments section. But I do want people to keep in mind that Pluto has a heart, that there is a purpose to your underworld experiences. And if you see your difficult experiences in life as a chance to renew yourself and discover the gold and the strength within you, the power that is within you, then you will come out victorious. there is purpose to Pluto difficulties. That said, Pluto in karmic astrology is one of the most powerful planets. He is the planet of trauma and the trauma of our past lives. He represents that in the chart, where our traumas in past lives have come from. Plus, he also represents the antidote to our trauma, the healing of our trauma, the renewal of ourselves after our karmic darkness. So if you're interested in karmic astrology, then do come study with me at the Royal Stars Academy. We will be exploring Pluto karma in greater depth in the courses that I offer there. So just to briefly sum up with a few things that Pluto rules, like I said, succulents and cactus, dead things, festivals that have to do with death and rebirth. Pluto rules blowflies. Pluto rules toilets and plumbing. Pluto rules poisonous animals, abduction, obviously. Pluto rules cesspools. Pluto rules sex organs. Pluto rules the subconscious workings of the mind and the body. Pluto rules bombs. Pluto rules Godivas, catacombs, cemeteries. Pluto rules pests and pest control, plutonium, murder, monsters. Pluto rules psychology. Pluto rules sex, snakes, sorcerers. Pluto rules the subterranean realms of the earth. He rules taxation, terrorism, toilets, tombs. Pluto rules laser beams, kidnapping, marshes, massacres. Pluto rules masochism. Now, I need to just quantify that one or clarify that one. Pluto rules masochism in the sense of cruelty to others. That's the Plutonian side of masochism. Neptune also has associations with masochism in the sense that Neptune rules the self-debasement aspect of masochism. Okay, just to make clear that one. Anything morbid is ruled by Pluto. Anything black, which is why I'm wearing black for this series, is ruled by Pluto. Nuclear scientists are ruled by Pluto. Violence is ruled by Pluto. Wars, X-rays, victims, venom, vampires. Hope you got all those things down. There are a few things, and I hope that gives you some of the essence of this nuclear atomic planet that we are all living with in our charts these days. So let's move on now and see what Pluto represents for us when he transits certain houses in the horoscope. So how do we work out if we have Pluto transiting through our 6th house? Well, for the next 20 years on, Virgo is going to have Pluto transiting through its 6th house because its 6th house is Aquarius. Virgo is the rising sign. We count that as the 1st house in whole sign astrology. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. 6 houses in whole sign astrology from the ascendant has Pluto moving through the 6th house for Virgo for the next 20 years. Now, after that, Pluto is going to be moving through the 6th house for Libran rising people. And we can always work out when Pluto, or where Pluto is, and what house he's moving through by simply counting from our ascendant to wherever Pluto happens to be by sign. So you can work out if Pluto's in the 6th by counting 6 houses like I just did, or maybe Pluto's sitting here in Sagittarius. You would count 1, 2, 3, 4, be the 4th house for you. So that's how you can determine whereabouts Pluto is moving according to whole sign astrology. So what does it mean for Virgo people to have Pluto transiting through the 6th house for the next 20 years? Well, Virgo is a sign that's very familiar with 6th house energies because they have a similarity to them, a similar nature to them. So a lot of this stuff is going to come as no surprise to Virgo people. What's really going to happen for Virgo rising people now is that they are going to find Pluto will empower certain qualities in their life that are particularly Virgonian. So that could see, because this is a house of the physical body, it's a house of disease, health, well-being, all the things that affect the physical body. So the 1st house is how we show up in the world with our physical body. This house is the house of what affects the physical body. So there could be transformations with Pluto moving through here, transformations of the physical body. Now that can look like perhaps getting sick. It can look like perhaps getting well. So whatever the scenario is in your life, it's likely to express as a change in the physical body in some way. Now, don't start getting panicky and think, oh my goodness, I'm going to get some terminal illness or something terrible like that. What's going to happen is that illnesses and weaknesses can alert you to deeper underlying issues in your psyche, which is very much a Pluto thing to do. When Pluto's in the 6th house in the natal chart, it can make for some very powerful healers who just instinctively, intuitively know what needs addressing and what needs to be healed. But in the case of the transit through this area of the chart, you're going to get signals from your body. So it pays to learn to tap in and tune in to what your body's trying to say to you. I'll give you an example. Recently, I have had a big lump on my foot. It's been very, very painful. And when I looked up in Louise Hay's book, How to Heal Your Body, I looked up what the meaning of a lump in that area of my foot was all about, and I found the deeper psychological issue that I need to work on. And that's the kind of thing we want to get really good at when we've got Pluto transiting the 6th house, looking at, maybe we've got an ingrown toenail, maybe we've got a, wart on our hand or something like that, or we keep getting pimples in the same spot on our face. And we want to look at, okay, well, what are these symbolisms coming and expressing through my body, trying to tell me about the deeper underlying either psychological issues or physiological issues that are present in my life. So if you can learn how to do that before this transit starts happening, you're going to be so well equipped. Again, I'll just recommend that book by Louise Hay, How to Heal Your Body, I think is what it's called. And there's also another one called The Body is the Barometer of the Soul, which is a really good one for correlating emotional, psychological experiences to what expresses in the body. So you might like to get a hold of one of those books or a book like that. We also, during this transit of Pluto, need to learn to take responsibility for our health and our well-being. No more shirking things. No more thinking we can eat McDonald's 3 times a day and still stay fit and healthy and youthful forever. Like, we need to start to own our power when it comes to our health. Pluto is calling us to that end while he transits the 6th house. So that means, perhaps changing your diet, changing your routine in order to support your body's journey more. As I said before, some people will have illnesses and weaknesses in the body that are alerting them to certain issues. You might have, let's say, I'm going to use a really off example, okay, but you might have a lot of flatulence or something going on, which could be indicating to you that there's something wrong with your tummy, with your gut health, and you have to completely change your diet in order to address maybe a celiac disease or gluten intolerance or something like that. So pay attention to the body once again. Take responsibility for your health and well-being, and don't ignore the signals, don't ignore the signs. We can become a bit obsessive about diets, about fitness programs, about health and wellness right now. We become fanatical if we're not careful, because that's the shadow side of Pluto, to be obsessive and, really too full on with something. So just be careful about that, becoming too obsessive about health and well-being to the point where it's damaging, because too much of anything is damaging. Too much exercise. If you've got to run, go on a 20k run every night of the week or something, you can be impacting your bones to the point where you get sort of semi-fractures in them because of the impact from running on the road or something like that. If we're too obsessive, too over the top with something, we can actually cause more damage to ourselves. It's all about balance. Pluto is not about balance, though. It may take you to an extreme with something. Pluto is the opposite of balance, actually. So be careful about that. With Pluto here, our regenerative abilities are really, really enhanced. The ability to heal from illness. This is why Pluto in the 6th house natally can mean you're a brilliant healer, because there's this enhanced ability to heal from illness and the enhanced ability to address health problems and regenerate ourselves from it, because Pluto is regeneration. Pluto is rebirthing. So you might have had, let's say, celiac disease for years, and then Pluto goes into the 6th house, you change your diet in some way, shape or form, and all of a sudden you're just like gold. You're energized, you're healthy, you're well, and everything is different. So totally regenerative energy is present when Pluto moves into this realm of the chart. Pluto, I'm really struggling with my words, aren't I? Pluto is also connected to surgery. So for some people, it's possible that some type of surgery might be needed during this time. It could be simply, like me, it's got a lump on my foot. Maybe it just needs to be cut out. It doesn't have to be anything dire. But when Pluto is moving through the 6th house, it can indicate that during the next 20 years, you might be in need of some kind of surgery. Now, if Pluto is making a hard aspect, that's an opposition or a square. In some cases, it's a conjunction. But if Pluto is making a hard aspect with your sun or your moon or the ascendant lord, which in the case of Virgo is Mercury, so you'll need to know, if you're looking at this video 20 years down the track, you'll need to know what the ruling planet of your rising sign is. So sun, moon, ascendant lord, or the 6th house lord. This is Saturn. Saturn rules Aquarius while Pluto moves through the sign of Aquarius, but that will change again in 20 years' time when Pluto moves into Pisces, and you'll have a different ascendant lord. So just to repeat again, if Pluto is in hard aspect to your sun, your moon, your rising sign lord, the ascendant lord, or the lord of the 6th house of your chart at any stage during this 20-year transit, that's when you might encounter some stressful health issues at that time. Anyone else who doesn't have that sort of thing forming in their chart, a square, an opposition, or perhaps a conjunction, then it's not going to be quite so nail biting, shall we say? You're nothing so much to worry about, but there might be some stressful health issues if you are having that aspect form at any time in the next 20 years. So use that as an empowerment tool. Be forewarned and forearmed, okay, maybe it is going to form one of those aspects that I spoke about. Perhaps it's a good idea then to maybe have a rainy day bank account just in case you've got to get a surgery. And maybe it prompts you to really focus on balance in life and health and well-being in your everyday routine. And if that's the outcome, then that's a good thing. It's going to prepare you and your body for dealing with those circumstances in the best way possible. So see astrological warnings of that nature, of let's say a negative nature, as an empowerment tool to help you navigate something with greater consciousness. Now, there's going to be lots of general self-improvement during this transit, both physically, as I've described, but also otherwise, because this is the house of perfecting the self. And Virgo's very into perfecting the self, to the nth degree sometimes that can be quite damaging, but they really want to make things better, want to correct things, want to improve upon things. It's very Virgo energy to do that. So lots of self-improvement can be occurring at this time, and Pluto will empower that process in all of our Virgo rising friends, but also for anyone experiencing Pluto in the 6th house by transit. We're going to get more organized now. We're going to get more practical. We're going to get more analytical if we have Pluto transiting the 6th house. So lots of transformations to the daily routine, and that means being more organized as much as being healthier, being more practical. The things that you want to produce now and want to create now are going to have much more practical use. So instead of sewing frivolous dresses, you might decide that your creative expression is going to be sewing curtains for your lounge room to try and keep the heat in or the cold out or whatever. So, you take on a practical approach to what you produce in your life. There's also an intense focus with this transit on the little details of life rather than the big picture. Anything that's ruled by Mercury, and Mercury has an association with the 6th house through the fact that Virgo is associated with the 6th house. So I hope you're following my drift there. But Mercury is little details, finite, sort of, looking at the fine print and reading the fine print and getting down to brass tacks, whereas something ruled by Jupiter or connected with Jupiter is much more forget the fine print, let's just look at the big picture. So very, very different energy between Mercury and Jupiter. They're quite, in a sense, they rule similar things like learning and knowledge and so forth, but they can be quite polaric about how they go about doing it. Back to the 6th house where Pluto is transiting. So we have this intense focus. Pluto is intensity and focus on detailed work, so rather than big picture things. So instead of, doing the big brushstrokes kind of artwork on a monstrous big wall, we're now doing fine needlework, that cross stitch that requires counting. And, it's that kind of contrast in all areas of our life, much more fine detail than big picture. So anything requiring precision, technical expertise, a high level of focus, these tend to be handled very well and very successfully now. So if you're in an occupational field that is requiring technical expertise, precision, etc., then you know that you're going to have a time of flourishing if your occupation requires a lot of fine detail. Speaking of occupations, this transit is one for feeling highly ambitious and exceptionally driven. This is a house of work, not career aspirations, but work, what we do to pay the bills. So if you're in a service occupation, and let's face it, the majority of occupations in the world are service occupations these days, things like nursing, teaching is a service occupation. Farming can be seen through the 6th house because you are serving the community by producing food to eat. Things like that. Anything that requires service, maybe you're a social worker, maybe you're a barista making coffees, that's a service that's been given, maybe you're a plumber. Service industries. If you're in those fields, you're going to be very ambitious about your work. You're going to be very driven about what you're doing. And you might make some particularly strong strides forward in the next 20 years towards empowering the job you do every day and getting to a much higher level in the job you do every day. But workaholism is a danger. You're going to be working harder than you ever have before now under this transit, and you've got to be careful about being a bit too obsessive about it. Pluto is obsession, and sometimes Pluto is very connected to addiction through this obsession as well. You can get addicted to work, so you just don't know how to switch off. Again, I come back to this balance in your routine that is so needed during this transit. You need a balanced routine, you need a balanced healthy lifestyle, which includes times of rest and relaxation and letting go of the stress. So avoid workaholism, or be conscious that you might be heading that way with Pluto transiting your 6th house. Some people might be changing occupations. This is particularly pertinent as Pluto moves into Aquarius over the next sort of 2 years he's going to take to fully get his feet in the Aquarius ground. So there can be some changes in occupations in the next 2 years for some Virgo people as a result of this. You are probably going to want to be your own boss a lot more than you usually would. And this might lead to you changing jobs and going out on your own in some way, or becoming a consultant or something. Other people who are experiencing Pluto transit the 6th house might be changing jobs many times. Going from here to there. It's not like things are unstable, but, you're just not going to tolerate what you have before in the workplace, and you'll have this highly ambitious drive that might see you sort of changing to progress up the work ladder. So lots of changing jobs, for better or worse. You're going to want to move and shift to feel in a better place, to be more aligned, to have purpose and meaning. In fact, all of you people who are having Pluto transit the 6th house are going to want more meaning, more purpose to what you do with your days, how you spend your life, what you are contributing to the world right now. Without meaning and purpose, you're going to want to get the hell out of wherever it is you're working and whatever it is you're doing. There's a stronger inclination, because Pluto empowers whatever it touches, and in the 6th house realm there is a stronger inclination to serve. Now, as I said, this is the realm of the chart that has to do with service industry. So you're going to be more inclined to serve, to help, and to fix problems in the world through your service, through your skill sets, through what you have to offer. So that's great. I mean, if you want to be an astrologer, Virgo rising people, or people with Pluto transit the 6th house, then make sure you include during this period some means where you're going to serve people with it, not just research for the sake of research, but if you are serving through helping lift people up, encourage people, give clarity to people, that's an act of service. Bring service into whatever it is that you do in your daily work, and you will do very well while Pluto transits the 6th house. Watch out for extremes, my dear friends, in perfectionist tendencies that can happen. Cut yourself some slack. You're human. You're allowed to make mistakes. Give yourself a break every now and again. You're not a machine. You're here to just experience life, not to be a cog in the machine, which is a very Aquarian thing, but you're not here to be a cog in the machine. You're here to just experience the joy of and the divinity of life in the divine in the human body. So watch out for perfectionist tendencies. They're not going to serve you well at all. Judgmentalism can also increase as we see Pluto move through the 6th house. So be very conscious of this, because awareness is your power. If you know, I might have a tendency to being a bit judgmental over the next 20 years, then you can be more guarded about it and filter your thoughts before they come out of your mouth, so to speak. Be very careful of being ungracious during this time. Now, if you are an employer and you have employees, there could be difficulties with staff and difficulties with employees during this time, because this is a house of employees and staff, but it's also a house that is connected to conflict. And of course, Pluto is expanding and empowering everything in this house, the 6th house. So that includes squabbles with employees and staff. So forewarned, forearmed about that. You might like to perhaps review any policies around those sorts of things in the workplace, just to make sure that you've got all your fine details organized, your I's dotted and your T's crossed in preparation for this. So another thing that we can see when Pluto transits through the 6th house is if we are feeling at all insecure, we might feel powerless in the workplace. Now, this is more the case if you are an employee yourself. You might feel more powerless in the workplace for some reason or another, maybe because there's squabbling staff members and you're caught in the crossfire, so to speak. This might, in some cases, it might lead to a cover-up of power, control, manipulation or dominance, and even ruthless behavior, either by other people to you or you to them. Consciousness is your power, my friends, to avoid those sorts of things. So if you find that co-workers are behaving that way towards you, then do take some action about it now. Stand in your power. That's what Pluto calls us to do, to stand in our power and our sovereignty. Stand in your power and address those sorts of issues in the workplace, and equally watch out for where you might be doing that to others and consciously avoid it. There can be some deep struggles with criticism. As I said, judgmentalism is increased during this transit, and so can criticism. Criticism of the self, or criticism of other people, criticism of the world, and that bitterness, that comes with too much criticism, outgoing, can be harmful to you karmically in the long run. And also, if we find that we are so sensitized to criticism being directed at us too, that can be just soul destroying. So I raise this point to give you an awareness of it, so that you can perhaps have some strategies in place and know, if I'm getting constantly criticized in the workplace, okay, well, what am I going to do about that? How am I going to handle that if that's what comes up for me during the next 20 years? Have a plan in place, have a strategy to help you deal with criticism, so that you're not debilitated by it, and equally you're not giving it out and dishing it out to the world as well. We do become more concerned with the practical things of life as Pluto transits through a very practically oriented house. So we're less inclined during this transit to be invested in the spiritual. Now, I know a lot of Virgo people are really spiritual people, and they are the archetype of the priestess, here to serve and help through whatever is their sacred work. We know that about Virgo. But by the same token, whoever is having Pluto transit the 6th house is going to be, whether it's through their own desire or whether it's through outer circumstances, just required to look more at the practical side of life, our earthly living, our embodiment in the physical, That might mean because we have to focus more on our health now. That might mean because we have to focus more on taking care, perhaps for the next 20 years, we've just had children, we've got to take care of kids. That really drags you into the material realm and out of the clouds, so to speak. So we become more concerned for one reason or another with practical life on earth rather than spiritual things. We can get a bit self-conscious about our appearance and our image, a bit more finicky about that. So again, don't be too hard on yourself. Maybe put some mantras up around the bathroom mirror that lift up that spirit of love for self, rather than, bringing self down through criticism and, being too self-conscious about our appearance. And the last thing I want to mention before we move into sort of some, not remedies, but ways we can deal with this transit to the best of our ability. The last thing that I do want to mention is that this is the final opportunity that you will get in life, whoever is having this transit, to make personal changes to the self before Pluto in 20 years' time. I mean, I say final time, but it's a 20-year period. Before Pluto then moves into the 7th house of your chart, and then he's in the public sphere, the public hemisphere, out there for all the world to see. Here I am. And it's much more about our relationship with out there rather than what's going on in here. So this transit is a chance to refine and perfect who we are inside in readiness for moving out in the world in another 20 years at the end of this particular transit through the 6th house. So what are the keys to working with this transit of Pluto? Well, keep a balance, as I said, with work. Rest and relax when you need to, and don't go to extremes of workaholism. Also, don't go to extremes in terms of healthcare and well-being either. Keep your balance. That's the key. That's really the key phrase for you guys for the next 20 years. Keep your balance. Don't overdo it in any particular area. Also, don't let health issues go on and on without getting appropriate care during this time. Maybe address the psychological cause behind it. Also, address the physical symptoms as well. Otherwise, it can get out of control. If you think, I'll be right, no worries, and you keep walking around on that terrible lump in your foot, and it ends up turning into something horrific, and, you have to get your foot chopped off. Don't do that. Go and get the appropriate care when symptoms and circumstances arise under this transit. Very, very important. It could go sour very fast if you don't. Practice non-judgmentalism. That's another thing that we addressed and is very important during this transit as well. I want you to find work that is meaningful and purposeful for you. And that doesn't mean necessarily having to go out and change careers, although some people will do this. But rather, I want to encourage you to find meaning and purpose perhaps in what you're doing, or how can you bring more meaning, more purpose into what you're doing. Maybe you're, scanning groceries at the checkout aisle, and that's your job. That's your daily, what you do to pay the bills. And you're like, oh, how do I find meaning and purpose in this? Because maybe you're giving somebody a smile and a conversation who hasn't talked to another human being for days, and you're the interaction they're going to have, and you have the opportunity to lift a person's spirit just by being a friendly, personable person on the checkout. I mean, that's just one example. Look for ways to bring meaning and purpose into what you do, and if you can't, then find a way to change what you're doing so that there's more meaning and purpose in what you're doing to make a living. So also you might want to, as a key to working with this transit, to change your daily life to better reflect your personal desires, your ambitions, and your needed health routines. So what are your personal desires? Maybe evaluate those right now. What are your personal ambitions? Evaluate those now, and then observe, okay, when Pluto is moving through the 6th house, how can I then bring those desires and those personal ambitions into my life in a greater way? It's very like what I've just described for you, that finding meaning and purpose in life. But you want to really know, don't you? What is my meaning? What is my purpose? So do the evaluation now. Pluto will help you get to the core of what those personal desires and ambitions are, and then you can change your life to better reflect those personal desires and ambitions. Let's say you have a personal desire to be an artist, but you are on that checkout scanning groceries. Okay, well, you've evaluated, that's my personal desire, that's my ambition, I want to be a known artist. So what do you need to do? What do you need to change in your daily life to support that ambition now? It might mean that you say to your boss, I'm going to only work from 8 until 2 on the checkout every day. and that's what I want. And he has to comply as all good bosses do. And then you spend from 3 until dinner time working on your art. Make the changes that you need to give your life more balance towards your desires and ambitions. Finally, address any insecurities you have in your life now, especially insecurities with work. So if you need to change jobs to feel better about yourself, to feel better about your life and who you are, then do that. If you need to change, not change jobs, if you need to get more training to feel more confident in the workplace, absolutely do that. Address any insecurities that you have about your physical health, your physical well-being, your physical appearance as Pluto transits this house in the chart. If we don't address those perceived weaknesses, frustrations at work or not feeling, qualified enough or whatever, if we don't, then we can get frustrated and lash out with the Pluto shadow energies, which can be to control and manipulate the people in our workplace and so forth. I'll give you an example. I know in rural Australia, particularly in rural councils, which is where I've spent a lot of my work life, women, I hate to single women out, but this is the way it is. Women in rural councils often get into like a position as, say, they're an accounts manager or something, and they're hanging on to that job for dear life. No matter come hell or high water, and they make life miserable for, say, everybody else around them, because they have an insecurity. I'm afraid it's rife in rural Australian circumstances many times, but they've got an insecurity about their ability to be, valued in their job and worthwhile in their job. So they stay too long in a particular position. They get bitter and frustrated, and they try, and I've seen it so many times, trying to put other people who are skilled and qualified down and run them down and demean them because they're scared they're going to take their position, their job. So they would, rather than dealing with their own insecurities, rather than maybe getting more training to give them more confidence in the role that they've got, they would rather put other people down and badmouth them and that sort of rubbish. So I don't know if that happens with men in any workplaces, but I've seen it particularly strong with women in the Australian local government scene in rural Australia. So personal insecurity is causing us to become manipulative, conniving, jealous, and obsessive about our job. When what they should be doing, like I said, is maybe changing jobs to somewhere they feel more comfortable and confident, or maybe getting more training so that they feel like, yeah, I've got this, I know what I'm doing and I'm happy in what I'm doing because this is me, this is my jam, this is meaningful to me. So that's another thing to address as well. If you are feeling insecure, particularly at work during this transit, do something about it. Don't turn into one of those bitter, clingy, I'm hanging on to my job and putting everybody else down who's threatening to me kind of people. So that was rather kind of like a nasty way to end, wasn't it? But it is a thing. And I'm sure it's the case all over the world that things like that can happen. This is Pluto energy, to be obsessive and manipulative. So we don't want to go into the shadow of Pluto. We want to stay in the light, working with things as best we can and using the good side of Pluto, which is to address the inner psychological self, the subconscious self that causes some behaviors. We want to address that and bring it out into the light and transform it and be rebirthed in some way, which is the gorgeous energy of Pluto to help us rise into our springtime like Persephone. So thank you so much, my friends, for joining me for this look at Pluto through the 6th house. I hope it's a blessing to you, this video. Join me next week when we'll be looking at Pluto transiting through the 7th house. I'll catch you then.